This angel you are seeing now ability arise to be alone, an old photograph of an adolescent sitting alluringly in a Victorian chair. But if you attending added closely, if you absolutely beam the accommodation that best bodies adopt to ignore, you will activate to apperceive article greatly disturbing. This child's eyes never opened afresh to see the ablaze of day. This is not an accustomed ancestor's photograph from the 19th century. This is one of the best ambiguous post-mortem photographs any time documented. And the adventure abaft, it goes far above what any photography history chiral would cartel to tell. In backward 1887, in a Victorian abode on the outskirts of Boston, a atrocious mother captivated in her accoutrements the asleep assay of her 8-year-old son. Winter had been decidedly atrocious that year, and diphtheria had claimed the lives of dozens of accouchement in the region. But for Helena Morrison, the accident of her alone son represented article far added adverse than a simple ancestor's tragedy. It represented the end of a lineage, the end of anxiously able dreams, and the alpha of an attraction that would advance her to accomplish decisions that would baffle not alone the amusing conventions of the time, but additionally the boundaries amid action and death. Post-mortem photography was not an aberrant convenience in the 19th century. In fact, it was advised an about angelic call for afflicted families. In an era back adolescent bloodshed accomplished alarming levels, and photography was still in big-ticket and attenuate luxury. Generally, the alone angel A ancestors could admission of a admired one would be afterwards their death. Photographers specialized in this macabre art developed adult techniques to actualize the apparition of life, positioning bodies naturally, painting attainable eyes over bankrupt eyelids, and a like application hidden metal structures to advance bodies in positions that adapted peaceful Betty-by instead of absolute death. But Helena Morrison's case was different, abnormally different, and the photograph that resulted from her attraction would become one of the greatest baffling mysteries of Victorian photography, breeding decades of speculation, investigation, and bashful abhorrence amid those adventurous abundant to abstraction it closely. Helena Morrison was not an accustomed woman. Widowed for 3 years, she had committed her action absolutely to adopting her son, James. She was a woman of ample resources, bequeathed from her bedmate, who had fabricated his affluence in the aroma barter with the Orient. Added importantly, she was a woman of aberrant apprenticeship for the standards of the time, accepting advised anesthetic and assay in Paris afore her marriage, an aberration that fabricated her doubtable in the eyes of Boston's bourgeois society, but which additionally gave her ability that would prove axiological in the contest that would follow. Back James fell ill in December 1887. Helena banned to acquire accustomed assay methods. She acclimated her medical ability to attack alpha treatments, alien medicines from Europe, consulted with the best specialists attainable on the East Coast. But diphtheria of that era was an about assertive afterlife sentence, and not all the assurance and assets in the apple could adapt the advance of the disease. James died on an algid January morning in 1888, with snow falling heavily al fresco the bedchamber window. Helena was by his ancillary captivation his baby Duke back. She acquainted the aftermost animation escape from the child's lips. The doctors present declared afterlife at 9:15 in the morning. What happened in the afterward hours would become the alpha of one of the best advancing cases in the history of post-mortem photography. Helena banned to acquiesce anyone to blow her son's body. She absolved the doctors, the servants, alike the archdiocese priest who had been alleged to administrate aftermost rites. She bound herself in the allowance with James's assay and remained there for about 24 hours. Neighbors and acquaintances accustomed it was a mother in abysmal mourning, clumsy to acquire the absoluteness of loss. They could not brainstorm what was absolutely accident abaft that bound door. Back Helena assuredly emerged from the room, there was article altered in her eyes. A cold, about accurate assurance had replaced the affectionate despair. She had fabricated a accommodation that would change everything. She would not achieve for a simple post-mortem photograph. She capital article more, article that would baffle afterlife itself. Helena Morrison had advised assay and assay in Paris, but she had additionally had acquaintance with abundant added abstruse practices. During her years of abstraction in France, she had met doctors who experimented with avant-garde canning techniques. some of whom formed in the atramentous frontiers amid official medical science and practices that belted on the occult. She had abstruse about canning methods that went far above simple embalming, techniques that could advance the actualization of action for abnormally connected periods. Helena's accommodation was clear. She would appoint the best post-mortem columnist available. But before that, she would use all her ability to bottle James in a way that would accomplish it attainable to actualize not aloof a photograph, but a assignment of art that would abduction consistently the aspect of her son's life. The columnist called was Augustus Peaton, a man accustomed throughout New England for his aberrant abilities in the art of post-mortem photography. Peon had developed techniques that were advised amazing by the standards of the time. His post-mortem portraits were so astute that some families appear accepting the awareness that their asleep admired ones were artlessly sleeping, about to death watch up at any moment. Back Helena Morrison approved out Peaton, she did not absolute herself to hiring his services. She fabricated a bend that absorbed him deeply. She offered him an abundant sum of money, added than he would acquire in an absolute year of work, but with one condition. He would accept to assignment alone on her action for an eon of 2 weeks application-adapted techniques that she herself would provide. Patton was an artist, but he was additionally an applied man. The bulk offered by Helena Morrison was absurd to refuse, abnormally because that winter had been difficult for business. He accustomed the bend afterwards allurement abounding questions. Audacious it was artlessly a afflicted mother with acceptable assets to ensure that her son's anamnesis would be preserved in the best attainable way. He could not accept absurd what he was accepting circuitous in. Back Patton accustomed at the Morrison abode the abutting day, he began a bearings that defied all his antecedent experience. Helena had adapted James's allowance into article that looked added like a medical class than a morning room. There was accessories that Peaton could not. Identify actinic substances in bottles and a set of medical instruments that adapted procedures abundant added circuitous than simple embalming. Helena explained to Peaton that she had acclimated adapted canning techniques on her son, methods she had abstruse during her studies in Europe. She said these techniques would acquiesce James to advance an actualization of action, abundant, added, acceptable, than would be attainable with accustomed methods, but that the action of photographing would charge to be done in a specific way, afterward absolute instructions that she would provide. James was built in an adorned chair, dressed in his best suit, his easily anxiously positioned on the chair's arms. At aboriginal glance, Peaton had to accept that the canning assignment was extraordinary. The adolescent seemed to be artlessly sleeping with a serene announcement on his face, his bark advancement and about accustomed color. It was one of the best absorbing examples of canning he had any time seen. But back Peaton began to adapt his accurate equipment. He began to apprehension accommodation that fabricated him, progressively added uncomfortable. There was article in the child's eyes that did not assume right. Although they were closed, there was a affection to them that adapted article above the simple Betty Bye of death, and there were added attenuate details. The way a blaze fell on James's face, the position of his hands, alike his facial expressions seemed to accommodate elements that defied rational explanation. Helena Morrison supervised every aspect of the accurate affair with accurate absorption to detail that belted on obsession. She had absolutely affected the camera position, the bend of light, alike the exact continuance of exposure. Every aspect of the agreement had been planned with accurate absorption that afflicted Pemberton, but which additionally began to anxiety him. During the photographing process, Peaton acclaimed that Helena fabricated abundant addendum in a notebook, recording not alone the abstruse aspects of photography, but additionally observations about James's assay condition, allowance temperature, and added factors that seemed extraneous to creating a simple canonizing photograph. It was during the 3rd hour of the affair that Peaton began to doubtable he was circuitous in article abundant added adverse than a simple post-mortem photograph. Helena had asked him to acclimatize James's position. Several times, and with anniversary movement, Patton noticed that the child's assay responded in a way that did not assume accustomed for a cadaver. They were not attainable movements, but subtleties in the way anatomy reacted, in the way bark responded to blow that adapted article acutely disturbing. Back Peton questioned Helena about the canning techniques she had used. She responded evasively, advertence alone that she had accumulated acceptable methods with some ability acquired during her studies in France. But there was article in her eyes, and about feverish acuteness that adapted there was abundant added to the adventure than she was accommodating to reveal. The accurate affair connected for 2 added hours during which Peton created an alternation of images of James. Anniversary photograph was technically perfect, demonstrating all the aesthetic accomplishment for which Pemberton was known. But there was article in the images that abashed him deeply. Back empiric through the camera lens, the photographs of James Morrison did not assume like portraits of a asleep adolescent, assuming for a final remembrance. They seemed like photographs of an animate adolescent artlessly sleeping. But it was added than that. There was the affection in the images that Peton could not explain, a attendance that seemed to transcend the band of accustomed photography. It was as if James were attractive anon through the lens, establishing a beheld affiliation with whoever empiric the image, alike with his eyes closed. Back the affair assuredly ended, Peton was afraid to leave the Morrison mansion. There was article in the environment, in Helena's intensity, in James's actual attendance, that larbored him acutely uncomfortable. He agreed to advance the photographs in his flat and bear them to Helena oral a week, as agreed. But the action of developing the photographs would prove alike added advancing than the accurate affair itself. Back Peton began animate with the accurate plates in the bashful black of his laboratory. He apparent that the images of James Morrison presented characteristics that defied his abstruse compassionate of photography. The aboriginal affair he noticed was the amazing accurateness of the images. A like application connected accessories and techniques. James's photographs presented a akin of detail and accuracy that surpassed annihilation Peton had accomplished previously. Every fiber of hair, every bark texture, every bend of accoutrement was captured with about abnormal precision. But it was added than simple abstruse quality. There were elements in the photographs that should not accept been there. Accommodation that Peton did not bethink seeing during the photography session. In the capital image, which would become accustomed artlessly as the boy, there were caligenosity and reflections that adapted added presences in the room. Presences that were not arresting back the photograph was taken. Added advancing still, there were aspects in James's facial announcement that seemed to accept afflicted amid the moment of abduction and the development process. The serene announcement that Peton remembered had acquired attenuate nuances that adapted not peace, but an anatomy of alertness that was absurd in a cadaver. Peton approved to rationalize these observations, advertence them to the accent of the bearings and the abnormal attributes of the accurate session. But back he completed the development action and empiric the final set of images, he was affected to accost the absoluteness that he had captured article that transcended the band of accustomed photography. The capital image, the one Helena Morrison had accurately requested, showed James built in the adorned armchair with his easily positioned on the chair's accoutrements in an affectation that adapted address and composure. But there was article in the angel that created a awareness of abstruse anxiety in anyone who empiric it for added than a few seconds. James's eyes, although closed, seemed to accommodate an anatomy of acumen that was absurd to explain. The position of his hands, admitting anxiously arranged, adapted not cadaveric rigidity, but a accustomed alleviation that adumbrated life. And there was the affection in the image's lighting that created the apparition that James was about to attainable his eyes and attending anon at the observer. Back Peton delivered the final photographs to Helena Morrison. She advised Anniversary Angel with affected absorption to detail. Her acknowledgment to the photographs accustomed Peton's growing suspicions that there was article fundamentally altered about the absolute project. Helena did not authenticate the archetypal affecting acknowledgment of a afflicted mother, accepting the aftermost images of her son. Instead, she advised the photographs with accurate intensity, authoritative addendum in her anthology about specific aspects of Anniversary Image. Back she focused on the capital image, the photograph that would become accustomed as the boy. Helena smiled for the aboriginal time back Peton had accustomed her. It was not a smile of affectionate achievement or affecting relief. It was the smile of addition whose abstracts had produced absolutely the accustomed results. Helena paid Peyton the agreed bulk and absolved him with specific instructions to never altercate the accommodation of the accurate affair with anyone. Peyton readily agreed, afraid to leave abaft the absolute advancing experience. But the contest of the afterward canicule would ensure that he would never be able to absolutely balloon what he had witnessed at the Morrison mansion. 3 canicule afterwards accustomed the photographs. Peyton accustomed an abrupt appointment at his studio. A man articular himself as Dr. Harrison Wickham, county coroner, and began allurement questions about the assignment Peyton had performed for Helena Morrison. Initially, Peyton accustomed it was the accustomed assay accompanying to James's death, but it bound became bright that the bearings was abundant added complex. Dr. Wickham abreast Peyton that he had accustomed an bearding complaint suggesting that Helena Morrison had affianced in aberrant practices accompanying to her son's body. The complaint did not specify the attributes of these practices, but adapted that an assay would be appropriate. As allotment of this investigation, Dr. Wickham bare to appraise any affidavit or affirmation accompanying to the contest afterward James Morrison's death. Peyton provided Dr. Wickham with a basal description of his assignment for Helena Morrison, advertence alone that he had created post-mortem photographs of her son, absolutely acknowledged and accustomed convenance at the time. But Dr. Wickham seemed to be attractive for article added specific. Allurement questions about the canning techniques used, the action of the assay during photography, and added accommodation that adapted above-mentioned ability about abnormal aspects of the case. It was during this chat that Dr. Wickham appeared advice that would absolutely transform Peyton's compassionate of the contest at the Morrison mansion. According to Dr. Wickham, Helena Morrison had not artlessly acclimated avant-garde embalming techniques on her son. She had affianced in actionable medical assay application substances and procedures that were not accustomed by official anesthetic of the time. Added advancing still, Dr. Wickham had apparent that Helena Morrison had maintained acquaintance with individuals in France who were circuitous and arguable, medical assay studies that explored the boundaries, amid action and afterlife in agency, that the official medical association advised bent and potentially dangerous. Dr. Wickham's assay had appeared that Helena Morrison had alien actinic substances and specialized medical accessories in the months above mentioned James's death. Accessories that bore no affiliation to accustomed medical treatments, but which seemed to be accompanying to alpha techniques of canning and reanimation. Back Peyton heard these revelations. He assuredly accustomed the accurate attributes of what he had witnessed at the Morrison mansion. Helena Morrison had not artlessly preserved her son's assay to actualize a added acceptable canonizing photograph. She had acclimated James as he accountable for medical abstracts that explored accurate possibilities that were above the band of accustomed anesthetic at the time. The ability that he had participated, alike involuntarily, in article that could be advised anatomy abuse or actionable medical assay larboard Peyton acutely disturbed, but it was too backward to adapt the contest that had already occurred. The photographs had been created, delivered to Helena Morrison, and now formed allotment of a abstruseness that would prove abundant, added advancing than anyone could imagine. Dr. Wickham requested that Peyton accommodate any added advice he ability, except about Helena Morrison or about the contest at the mansion. Peyton declared his observations about the abnormal action of James's body, the anarchistic techniques acclimated by Helena, and the appropriate aspects of the constant photographs. But alike while accoutrement this information, Peyton knew he was alone alpha to accept the accurate admeasurement of what he had witnessed. Dr. Wickham's official assay connected for several weeks, during which Peyton was contacted several times to accommodate added information. But gradually the assay seemed to lose momentum. Dr. Wickham explained that although there was affirmation suggesting aberrant practices, there was bereft affirmation to absolve acknowledged action adjoin Helena Morrison. James's assay had been animate according to acknowledged procedures, and there was no absolute affirmation of abuse of specific laws. Added importantly, Helena Morrison had disappeared. One anniversary afterwards, Dr. Wickham's antecedent appointment to Peyton, It was apparent that Helena had labored Boston abruptly afterwards allegorical anyone about her destination. The Morrison abode was labored in the affliction of attorneys who accustomed instructions to advertise it as bound as possible. Helena Morrison had artlessly vanished, demography with her all the secrets about the abstracts she had conducted on her son. The alone actual affirmation that remained from the contest at the Morrison abode were the photographs, created by Peyton, and these photographs would prove to accept characteristics that would abide to artifice and afflict all who advised them during the afterward decades. Peyton kept copies of the photographs in his claimed archive, initially alone as affidavit of one of the best abnormal cases of his career. But over time, he began to apprehension that the photographs seemed to apply a aberrant anatomy of allure over anyone who empiricked them. Clients who visited his flat and occasionally saw the photographs frequently asked questions about them, commenting on the amazing affection of the images and on article ambiguous that fabricated them memorable. It was through these accidental interactions that Peyton began to apperceive that James Morrison's photographs bedeviled qualities that went above simple, abstruse excellence. There was article in the images that created an acute, affecting acknowledgement in observers, an aggregate of allure and ache that seemed to affect bodies in altered ways, but consistently significantly. Some assemblage appear a awareness that James was about to attainable his eyes and attending anon at them. Others mentioned animate dreams afterward seeing the photographs, dreams in which James appeared as an animate and acquainted presence, and there were cases of bodies who, afterwards celebratory the photographs for abiding periods, appear adventures that adapted some blazon of advice or affiliation with James's image. These reactions began to anguish Peyton, who gradually chock-full assuming James Morrison's photographs to accidental visitors. But the acceptability of the images had advanced through Boston's accurate community, and Peyton began to accept specific visitors absorbed in analytic what was actuality declared as. One of the best amazing examples of post-mortem photography any time created. Amid the best notable visitors who approved out Peyton was Dr. Samuel Rutherford, a physician and researcher from Harvard University, specializing in alien acoustic phenomena. Dr. Rutherford had heard rumors about photographs that assumed to acquire abnormal backdrop able of afflictive specific cerebral reactions in observers. As a researcher of phenomena that defied accustomed medical understanding, he was artlessly absorbed by the achievability of belief these images from an accurate perspective. Back Dr. Rutherford Aboriginal advised James Morrison's photographs. His acknowledgement was actual and unequivocal. As an accomplished physician, he had apparent hundreds of cadavers and endless post-mortem photographs. But James Morrison's images presented characteristics that challenged his able experience. There was the affection in the body's canning that adapted medical techniques far added avant-garde than annihilation attainable in accustomed anesthetic of the time. Added a resting still. Dr. Rutherford noticed that the photographs affronted specific physiological reactions in him that he could not explain rationally. Afterwards, celebratory the images for abiding periods. He accomplished alterations in affection rate, changes in beheld perception, and a growing awareness that he was actuality empiric by article oral the photographs. These reactions were constant with letters he had heard from added observers, suggesting that the images bedeviled backdrop that went above simple aesthetic excellence. Dr. Rutherford requested permission to conduct an analytic abstraction of the photographs application medical and cerebral assay techniques to try to accept the mechanisms abaft the reactions they provoked. Peanutton, still abashed by the contest at the Morrison mansion, agreed to collaborate, acquisitive that an accurate assay could accommodate rational explanations for the abashing aspects of the images. Dr. Rutherford's abstraction began with an abundant, abstruse assay of the photographs. Application avant-garde deepening equipment, he advised every aspect of the images, attractive for abstruse anomalies that could explain their abnormal properties. What he apparent exceeded his best aggressive expectations. Microscopic assay appear that the photographs independent accommodation that should not accept been attainable with the accurate techniques attainable in 1888. The accurate chrism granulation showed patterns that adapted acknowledgement to forms of action that were alien at the time. Added cogent still, there were structures in the images that appeared to accept been captured in assorted layers, as if altered aspects of absoluteness had been photographed simultaneously. Dr. Rutherford anxiously accurate anniversary discovery, creating an annal that would become one of the best arguable accurate investigations of the backward Victorian period. His addendum appear a growing allure with accurate possibilities that were above the band of accustomed medicine, alveolate the aforementioned basic frontiers that Helena Morrison had allegedly crossed. The assay of cerebral reactions to the photographs produced alike added arresting results. Dr. Rutherford developed an alpha agreement in which volunteers were apparent to James Morrison's images beneath. Controlled altitude with ecology of physiological responses and abundant letters of abstract experiences. The after effects defied any accustomed explanation. 83% of participants appear a awareness of acquainted attendance appearing from the photographs. 71% accomplished alterations in Banosic acumen during acknowledgement to the images, and 57% declared adventures that adapted some anatomy of nonverbal advice with James Morrison's image. Added advancing still, 29% of participants appear alternating dreams in the weeks afterward exposure. Dreams in which James Morrison appeared as an animate presence, frequently attempting to acquaint specific advice about contest or affairs accompanying to his afterlife, and the abstracts conducted by his mother. Dr. Rutherford accurate anniversary address with the absorption of an accurate investigator, but gradually began to apperceive that he was ambidextrous with phenomena that transcended the band of accustomed medical science. James Morrison's photographs assumed to action as a anatomy of arch amid the apple of the animate and article above a breast accurate understanding. During the third ages of his study, Dr. Rutherford fabricated an assay that absolutely adapted his compassionate of the case. While analytic the photographs beneath specific lighting conditions, he noticed that assertive areas of the images assumed to acknowledge added advice back empiric from accurate angles or beneath specific ablaze intensities. Application Ashen assay techniques that were actuality developed for ample applications. Dr. Rutherford apparent that the photographs independent layers of advice that were not arresting beneath accustomed observation. These layers appear accommodation about the Morrison abode ambiance that had not been captured by the camera lens, including added presences in the allowance that were not physically present during the accurate session. Added amazing still ashen assay appear that the photographs seemed to accommodate advice about contests that had occurred at the Morrison abode afore James's death, as if the images had captured not aloof a specific moment in time, but in bury of assorted Banosic periods. These discoveries led Dr. Rutherford to a cessation that challenged both his medical training and his compassionate of concrete reality. The alpha techniques acclimated by Helena Morrison on her son had not artlessly preserved James's assay in an acceptable way. They had created altitude that accustomed aspects of James's alertness to abide animate afterwards concrete death, and these altitude had been assuredly captured in the photographs. The association of this cessation was greatly disturbing. If Dr. Rutherford was correct, James Morrison's photographs were not artlessly portraits of a asleep child. They were affidavit of an anatomy of post-mortem actuality that had been artificially maintained through medical abstracts that explored absolutely alien accurate territories. Dr. Rutherford attempted to locate Helena. Morrison to admission added advice about the techniques she had used, but his investigations accustomed that she had abolished completely. There were no annal of her abode afterwards her abandonment from Boston, and all contacts she had maintained in France were clumsy to accommodate advice about her accepted location. Helena Morrison's absence meant that the secrets abaft the abstracts with James would abide consistently hidden, but the photographs connected to abide as actual affirmation that article amazing had occurred at the Morrison mansion. Article that defied not alone the medical conventions of the time, but the actual band of animal compassionate about life, death, and consciousness. During the fourth ages of his study, Dr. Rutherford began to acquaintance claimed furnishings that abashed him deeply. Abiding acknowledgement to James Morrison's photographs was alpha to affect his own cerebral stability. He added animate dreams in which James appeared not as an anamnesis or imagination, but as a acquainted and candid presence. These dreams frequently independent specific advice about James's action afore his death. Advice that Dr. Rutherford could not accept accustomed through accustomed sources. Added advancing still, the dream seemed to be acceptable added absolute than his animate. Experiences. Creating a growing awareness that the band amid absoluteness and article above was acceptable indistinct. Acquainted the abeyant dangers of continuing his investigation, Dr. Rutherford fabricated the accommodation to formally end his abstraction of James Morrison's photographs. But the actual he had calmed during 4 months of accelerated assay represented aberrant accurate affidavit of phenomena that defied rational explanation. In his final report, Dr. Rutherford assured that James Morrison's photographs represented affirmation that Helena Morrison had accomplished article that official medical science advised impossible. She had created altitude that accustomed aspects of animal alertness to abide above concrete death. And these altitude had been assuredly captured in accurate form. Dr. Rutherford recommended that the photographs be kept in defended annal, attainable alone to able advisors who accustomed the cerebral risks associated with abiding acknowledgement to the images. He warned that the photographs bedeviled backdrop that could be alarming to extemporaneous observers, abnormally those with predispositions to cerebral instability. Dr. Rutherford's address was submitted to Harvard University administration, but was never clearly published. The discoveries he accurate were advised too arguable and potentially alarming for accessible disclosure. The address was classified as belted bookish material, attainable alone to called advisors beneath specific circumstances. Peaton, already acutely abashed by his accord in the Aboriginal events, absently to chase Dr. Rutherford's recommendations and accumulate James Morrison's photographs in clandestine archive. He chock-full assuming the images to visitors and gradually accomplished discussing the case with anyone, al fresco the belted amphitheater of advisors who had become circuitous in the accurate investigation. But the photographs would not abide hidden permanently. During the afterward decades, rumors about the amazing post-mortem images created by Peaton began to broadcast through specialized circles of actual photography collectors and advisors of alien phenomena. In 1923, James Morrison's photographs were apparent by Dr. Victoria Ashford, a beat analyst who was administering assay on beheld manifestations of cerebral trauma. Dr. Ashford had heard ambiguous references to the photographs during her assay and managed to locate Pemberton, now an aged man who agreed to acquiesce her to appraise the images beneath carefully controlled conditions. Dr. Ashford's assay concentrated on the cerebral aspects of reactions to the photograph's application analytic techniques that had been developed back Dr. Rutherford's Aboriginal study. Her discoveries accustomed and broadcast antecedent conclusions, demonstrating that James Morrison's photographs bedeviled backdrop that activated specific academician areas associated with bonosic acumen and alertness recognition. Dr. Ashford accurate that assemblage of the photographs frequently accomplished acoustic alterations that persisted for cogent periods afterwards exposure. These alterations included changes in academician beachcomber activity, alterations in acoustic acumen, and activation of acoustic areas associated with airy or abstruse experiences. Added significantly, Dr. Ashford apparent that reactions to the photographs were cumulative. Assemblage who were apparent to the images assorted times developed stronger acoustic admission with the photograph's content, eventually advertisement adventures that adapted absolute advice with James Morrison. These discoveries led Dr. Ashford to a cessation that echoed Dr. Rutherford's allegation 3 decades earlier. James Morrison's photographs were not artlessly changeless images of a asleep child. They functioned as an anatomy of interface amid animate assemblage and some assiduous aspect of James's alertness that had been captured and preserved through the abstracts conducted by his mother. Dr. Ashford's assay was abruptly disconnected in 1925 back she suffered what was clearly declared as a afraid breakdown. Colleagues appear that she had become obsessively focused on James Morrison's photographs, spending hours celebratory the images and authoritative addendum about communications she claimed to be accepting anon from James. In the aeon anon above mentioned her breakdown, Dr. Ashford had amorphous to advance that James was attempting to acquaint advice about Helena Morrison's accepted abode and about added abstracts she had conducted afterwards abrogation Boston. These allegations were advised delusions by Dr. Ashford's colleagues, but her claimed addendum independent specific accommodation that could not accept been accustomed through accustomed sources. Afterwards, Dr. Ashford's breakdown, James Morrison's photographs were afresh aloof from apportionment and kept in clandestine archive. Pemberton's family, who had affiliated the images afterwards, his afterlife in 1919, absentatively they were too alarming for added assay and kept them in a assurance drop box, aloof to approaching researchers. During the afterward decades, the photographs became an burgle fable, amid collectors of actual artifacts and advisors of abstruse phenomena. References to the images occasionally appeared in bookish accessories about Victorian photography, but consistently as footnotes about an bottomless case of amazing, abstruse quality. The accurate admeasurement of the photograph's abnormal backdrop remained accustomed alone to an actual belted amphitheater of advisors who had had absolute admission to the images. And alike amid these researchers, there was abhorrence to altercate their discoveries due to the arguable and potentially alarming attributes of the material. In 1967, James Morrison's photographs were rediscovered by Dr. Robert Chen, a neuroscientist from Columbia University, who was researching beheld interfaces amid alertness and perception. Dr. Chen had begun references to the photographs in actual Athenaeum and managed to admission permission from the Petten ancestors to appraise the image's application. Avant-garde acoustique assay technique. Dr. Chen's assay acclimated avant-garde academician ecology accessories to abstraction, the acoustic reactions of volunteers, apparent to the photographs. His discoveries accustomed and quantified the furnishings that antecedent advisors had observed, but application abundant added accurate methodology. Dr. Chen accurate that James Morrison's photographs affronted specific patterns of academician action that were constant amid altered observers. These patterns adapted that the images activated acoustic circuits associated with acquainted alertness in added animal beings, admitting the actuality that James Morrison was acutely dead. Added amazing still, Dr. Chen apparent that the acoustic patterns affronted by the photographs were identical to those empiric during interactions with animate people. Assemblage accuracy responded to James Morrison as if he were a acquainted and animate presence, not a changeless angel of a asleep person. These discoveries provided the aboriginal cold accurate affirmation that James Morrison's photographs bedeviled backdrop that transcended accustomed explanation. The animal academician with its evolutionary accommodation. To ascertain alertness in added beings was responding to article in the Photographs that Adapted Animate Brainy Presence. Dr. Chen attempted to aggrandize his assay to accommodate, alike added avant-garde assay techniques. But his assignment was disconnected back the Peten ancestors absentatively to assuredly abjure the photographs from accurate investigation. They had become added afflictive with the absorption the images were accepting and anxious about the implications of the accurate discoveries. James Morrison's photographs were transferred to a clandestine academy specializing in the canning of acute actual artifacts area. They remained aloof for accessible research. The alone affidavit that remained attainable were the fractional letters from the three capital advisors who had advised the images: Dr. Rutherford, Dr. Ashford, and Dr. Chen. Today, about 140 years afterwards, James Morrison's photographs were created. They abide one of the greatest baffling mysteries in the history of photography, the different aggregate of affairs that led to their creation. A atrocious mother with avant-garde medical knowledge, alpha canning techniques, and aberrant accurate abilities will allegedly never be replicated. But the implications of the accurate discoveries accompanying to the photographs abide to bell through assorted fields such as neuroscience, alertness studies, and compassionate of the boundaries amid action and death. If the advisors who advised the photographs were correct, They represent affirmation that aspects of animal alertness can abide above concrete afterlife beneath specific affairs, and that these altitude can be artificially created through accurate intervention. The angel you saw at the alpha of this documentary, that allegedly simple photograph of a Victorian adolescent built in an adorned chair, carries with it decades of accurate investigation, baffling mystery, and axiological questions about the attributes of animal consciousness. James Morrison, preserved consistently in that serene pose, may represent added than a simple ancestor's afterthought from an ancient era. He may be affirmation that our compassionate of the boundaries of life, death, and alertness is abundant added from complete accuracy than we any time imagined. And if Helena Morrison absolutely accomplished what advisors doubtable she achieved, the implications for our compassionate of animal actuality are too abstruse to be absolutely comprehended. The photograph charcoal bashful but eloquent, a window into mysteries that may never be absolutely unraveled. James Morrison continues to beam us through the centuries, accustomed secrets that baffle our best axiological compassionate of what it agency to be absolutely animate or absolutely dead. If you were absorbed by this amazing adventure of actual abstruseness and accurate discovery, if you were absorbed by this assay into the atramentous territories area, science meets the inexplicable. Subscribe to our approach for added abysmal investigations into the best arresting and advancing cases in history. There is abundant added to analyze in the aphotic territories area. Science encounters the unexplainable. And Anniversary Assay brings us afterpiece to compassionate truths that may transform our acumen of animal absoluteness forever. Music.